Okay, so part of what Brandy Lawless talks about is what she calls an erasure of social class. And as a result of that, she says, in the academy in general, in higher education in general, even in lower education, there is this sense of staying away from social class issues. So that she says there's a lack of research regarding those social class research. There's just not a lot of research out in the field. Also paired with this, she says there's a discourse about whiteness and white privilege that dismisses intersectional identities. And we can think of that in a sense of what Brandy Lawless is saying is that when we talk the discourse of whiteness and white privilege becomes so predominant that all white people are considered to be the same. It becomes this all kind of almost oppressive discourse. So it doesn't let you talk about people who are in different situations and people that are more privileged or less privileged within European American backgrounds in America. And so for Brandy Lawless, she had this experience of growing up and hearing things in a certain way about her privilege, and she can understand, yes, in some situations that I can absolutely understand that privilege is operating, but if you consider my privilege the same as somebody who was raised in an upper middle class privilege, or who was raised with generations of people who had gone to college, it's a completely different thing. So when we talk about identity categories in academia, so in higher education, part of what Lawless argues is that visible categories trump invisible categories. So visible categories become more important. We can think of the visible categories, right, as kind of the master identity categories. Things like race, sex, gender, large-scale, obviously visible categories. And her argument is that one of the reasons why class is marginalized or kind of left out of the discussion in academia is that class can be more easily performed, altered, or faked, right? All you need to do is be able to have one nice outfit, and that nice outfit could have been bought in a secondhand store, could have been donated to someone, could have been, somebody else could have gifted somebody with it, in the sense of, and you could, put a performance on it. Class can also be altered in the sense of you can marry somebody who has more money, or you can do something where you will move up in an income category. So in a sense, there's a reason why the visible categories trump the invisible categories, because you can't change the visible categories. Well, let's say that's not necessarily true, right? If you are somebody who does not have a European American background, however, you have a light complexion, there may be some things you do to, in fact, appear as if you are a European American. And we have the interesting example of Rachel Dolezal, who was the head of the NAACP in Spokane, Washington, who was born as European American in a European American family and slowly took on the personal identity as an African American and altered her look so that she would appear African American even though she did not have African American background. So, and obviously there are operations and so forth where someone can kind of change their physical characteristics to associate with a sex to which they were not originally born. So there are some ways that we can alter the visible categories, right? We can just, in fact, just start dressing as if we are of the opposite sex from the sex from which we were born, and start, obviously performing in that way. So there are things we can do, obviously, with visible categories, but they're not as easily performed, altered, and faked as the invisible categories. Class is more invisible than whiteness, right? So we talk about whiteness, and you read a lot about the stuff you'll read about whiteness, is that whiteness is invisible in culture, meaning that that with the majority of people white, they don't see white when they walk down the street. They just see that as just a person, right? But they will see someone of color and identify them as someone of color, whether that person is, coming from the eastern side of the Pacific Rim, whether that person is African American, whether that person is Latino. They will have this idea, they will see the difference. The difference is marked, and the whiteness is invisible. And what Lawless argues is that class is actually even more invisible than whiteness. We don't see class. We don't identify it in a sense of as an important thing in the field, in academia. And one of the things that she identifies is that the way that people talk about these issues in academia is that it has whites, as European Americans versus all marginalized groups, which makes it difficult to conceptualize a marginalized white person, because white people are here and everyone else is marginalized. So how do you conceptualize a marginalized white person? That then becomes part of her argument. Of course, now it could be a marginalized female, right? So I guess I would argue that Lawless's position could be white men versus all marginalized groups, because we see women as a marginalized group in the normal critical discourse. That's why we have feminism and feminist research and feminist critical cultural research. So we have that as well. So the main issue, right, with all of this goes back to this notion of intersectionalities, that we want to have a more complex understanding of identity, a more complex understanding of people. With the recent attacks that happened in Paris, right, we run the risk of, again, doing a similar thing with regards to people who follow the faith of Islam, in the sense that we can look at people who follow that faith as all terrorists. People who follow the faith can say, no, that's not Islam, that's something else. An intersectional perspective would say that there is a significant body of people who follow the faith of Islam who are using that faith in a way that allows them to justify violent acts against individuals. From an intersectional standpoint, we would say that Islam is actually part of that intersection. So the people who are saying that's not Islam, well, no, that's not actually accurate, because Islam is actually a part of it, which makes the people who say all Muslims are terrorists, or Islam is a terrorist religion, right? When they hear people say that's not Islam, and they're like, well, but wait, all these guys are saying they're killing everybody in the name of Allah, and they were trying to create an Islamic state, so saying it's not Islam doesn't make sense. If we take it from an intersectional standpoint, we can say, well, Islam is in there. Now let's look at all the other factors. Let's look at all the other intersections that get somebody who follows the faith of Islam and believes in peace and goodwill towards others differently than somebody who believes that it's their um, responsibility to participate in jihad. So, an intersectional engagement can get us to a point where we can start seeing these distinctions instead of working within these large categories, such as Brandy Lawless is arguing, whiteness becomes this broad category that doesn't allow people to see distinctions. In the sense, and in the sense, we can say it stereotypes one group. Intersectional research allows us to get beyond those large-scale stereotypes. Thank you and have a great day.